Question. Who is the most important person in this room? You're right. You are the most important person in this room. You are the most important person in your world. This entire universe of billions of planets revolves around you. Nothing else in the world has any meaning except for the meaning you give it. You are the most important person. And as we said before, how important you think you are determines everything that happens to you. If you consider yourself to be an important person, you set bigger goals. If you consider yourself to be a more important person, you persist longer. You set higher standards. You strive for excellence. If you think that you're an important person, you treat other people as though they're important as well. And they treat you as though you're important back. So how important you feel you are, as we said before, your level of self-esteem is the most important statement about you. And the wonderful thing is that the more you practice these principles, the more you think about what you want, the more you plan for it, the more you work toward it, the better you get at your work, the better you feel about yourself, and the more important you feel you are. So you actually build yourself up. Just like if you wanted to become physically fit, you do physical work, you work out with your body. If you want to become mentally fit, you do some of the things we're talking about today. Now, second question is this. What is the most important part of today, this seminar? What's the most important part of the seminar? Not a trick question. The answer is what you do afterwards. You see, it's the actions that you take that make the difference between success and failure. Successful people take action, unsuccessful people don't. Successful people hear something and they move on it. Unsuccessful people hear the same thing and they say, well, I'm going to do something about that someday. And they live in a vacation place called Someday Isle. And they sit there and they sit in the sun and they say, someday I'll read that book. Someday I'll go to that course. Someday I'll make a decision to be one of the best in my field and work at it every day. But they live on Someday Isle and they never do it. So it's really important, if you hear something good, you act on it. Now, I said this morning that the first part we would talk about the psychology of selling. The psychology we've talked about, you become what you think about most of the time. If we asked top salespeople what they think about most of the time, one of the things they think about is selling more stuff. They think about selling all the time. They get up in the morning and they think about selling, and they think about selling all day long. And they think about selling in the evening, and they think about selling on the way home, and they think about selling on the weekend. Now, many people think, well, when I finish work, I don't like to think about my work. Well, that's okay. It just means that you have no future. Because that would be the same as saying, well, when I'm at work, I don't like to think about my family. I like to just sort of leave that as another part of my life. The fact is that your family and you are part 24 hours a day. You think about it all the time. If you're in the right field, you think about it all the time. So then we say, well, what are the things that top salespeople think about in selling? And we talk about the psychology of selling. Now, there's several things we could talk about in the next hour, and I want to talk about some of the most important. Basically, I said there's 7 key parts of selling, 7 key result areas. And the 7 key result areas determine your success or failure. Wherever you're strong, you'll be doing well. Wherever you're weak, it'll be holding you back. And your job is to identify where you're strong and do more of it, and identify where you're weak and bring it up. Okay, it's a real simple process, but it's all you have to do to move to the top of your field is keep working on the skills that are holding you back and keep maximizing the skills that are getting you there. Now, the 7 skills are, number 1 is prospecting. You have to have someone to talk to. Now, let's talk about prospecting a little bit. Prospecting, we say that the key to success in selling means spending more time with better prospects. Spend more time with better prospects. Spend more time with people who are more likely to buy. And there is a sales funnel that I want to show you. And the sales funnel is like this. And the rule is that there are 3 parts of selling. There are prospecting. And that's the first part of the sales funnel. And then the second part is presenting, showing your product. And that's the second part of the funnel. And the third part is following up and closing. So I'll just say follow up and close. And this is phase 3. Now, your job is to keep this hopper full all the time. And the 80-20 rule applies. Spend 80% of your time prospecting and presenting, and only 20% of your time presenting and following up. Spend 80% of your time prospecting and presenting until your hopper is full. Now let us say that this is a ratio of 20 to 5. You have to call on 20 people to get 5 people that you can see personally. And let's say the ratio then, for every 5 people you talk to personally, we have 2 that you can follow up with, and of these 2, 1 turns into a sale. So what is your ratio of calls to sales? It's 20 to 1, okay? You have to see 20 people to make a sale. Now you have 2 jobs from now on. Number 1 is keep the hopper full. Keep the hopper full so that you always have lots of people to talk to. And number 2 is get better at your key skills. Get better at prospecting. Get better at presenting. Get better at following up and closing. A small improvement in your prospecting so that you spend more time with better prospects is going to increase the quality of the people you talk to. A small improvement in presenting is going to increase the number of people you follow up with, and a small improvement in closing will increase your sales so you can actually go from 20 to 1, where you are today, to 10 to 1 very quickly. If you go from 20 to 1 to 10 to 1, what will happen? You'll double your income. So you must always be looking for ways to prospect better. And I want to tell you an interesting concept about prospecting, and it has to do with high probability prospect versus low probability prospects. I got a question here from Anthony, and Anthony says a very common objection here in Singapore is that the economy is bad. How do we solve this objection? Anybody heard that? The economy is bad? Say yes. Yes. Okay. It's a good reason for not buying, but are people buying food? Are people buying clothes? Are people buying homes? Are people buying cars? Are people buying... Remember, when there's 5% unemployment, there's 95% employment. And so the economy is down a little bit, but the main problem is dealing with poor prospects. So with prospects, you have 2 types. You have what we call high probability prospects and low probability prospects. Now, what is a high probability prospect? Well, it's one that's very close to buying when you meet them. If you sell hamburgers and you meet a person who's really hungry, that's a good prospect. If you sell cars and you meet a person who's looking for a car right now, that's a good prospect. If you're selling life insurance and you meet a person who just had a young child and wants to provide for their future, that's a good prospect. My throat just went dry. It's unbelievable. So the other end of the spectrum is... Excuse me. The other end of the spectrum is low probability prospects. People are a long, long way from buying. And here's what we know. It's sort of like a thermometer. Is everybody you meet is somewhere in here. Your job is to spend more time with prospects that are up here. So your job is to spend more time with people who can and will buy your product or service in a reasonable period of time. And so at the beginning you need to sort out prospects from high probability to low probability. So what is a high probability prospect? Number 1, they have a need for what you're selling right now. Okay? If they say, I don't need it, I don't want it, I can't use it, I can't afford it, business is bad, I'm broke, and I have no future, this is not a good prospect. So people say, well, how can I sell to these people? You can't! It's like selling hamburgers to a person who just ate. They're not hungry. So the first thing you need to do is you need to say, who are the people in my market who most need my product? One of the changes that have taken place in the last few years is about 2 or 3 years ago when business was booming, everybody was buying. Is that there were more buyers than there were sellers. An idiot could be successful in selling. I work for a company that has 4,000 salespeople. It does $3 billion a year. One of the top companies in the world. The beginning of last year, not this year, but last year, they invited me to Las Vegas to speak to their top 20% of salespeople, 800. They brought them to Las Vegas, and they had them in one of these great casinos that cost $1 billion. I mean, has anybody ever been to Las Vegas? It's a most amazing, don't go. It's a most amazing place. They had this great celebration because in the year 2000, these people had had a fabulous year. All right? And they brought the top 20%, set them up in the hotel, 3 days, dinners, ta-da. Okay? 3 months later, this is in April of 2001, the vice president of marketing called me and said, we have a real problem. These people can't sell. I said, what do you mean you can't sell? They sold $3 billion worth last year. He said, we found that when the market turned down and people weren't simply calling up and buying, these people didn't even know how to make an appointment. They didn't know how to sell. They didn't know how to make presentations. They didn't know how to sell against higher or lower priced competition. They don't know how to sell. We have a real disaster on our hands. And he literally said, is there any way you can do, anything you can do to help us? And he went out and he was literally on the road for the next year, just traveling around, bandaging up wounded sales forces. Because he said, these people who we thought were our superstars can't sell anything. So your job is to realize that the market has changed. It used to be that there were more customers than there were salespeople. Now there's more salespeople than there are customers. It used to be you could machine gun the market, and now you have to rifle the market. You have to pick your shots very carefully. You have to be more focused. You have to do more preparation when you're dealing with dealing with customers. You have to give more thought to who it is who can use your product or service. And you have to work harder to get appointments with key people. You can't just rush out at the market like a dog chasing a rabbit across a field. You have to be very, very focused. That's one of the things that I have learned in the last couple of years. It requires a complete mind shift. So, you have to ask yourself, who is a high probability prospect? Number one is they need your product or service. Number two, they can afford it. They have the money. You don't call on bankrupt.com businesses and try to make sales. Because they're thinking of killing themselves. You know, they're not thinking of buying what you have to offer, and even if they do buy it, they can't pay for it. So you also want a company, you want people who like and respect your industry and your business, and best of all, people who like and respect you. You want to deal with people who are decisive and who can make a decision. I have a friend who went through my program a couple of years ago and went straight to the top of his business in the next year. And it was with one idea. I said to him that you need to make sure that the person you're talking to can and will buy from you within a reasonable period of time. Don't keep calling back on people who won't buy or who can't buy. So he started doing this. He wrote me a letter. He said 1 year later he had tripled his income from 30,000 US to 90,000 US, and he had become the number one person in his industry. Whenever he met with a prospect, he would say, oh, by the way, if I show you something that you really like, or if you really like what I'm showing you, what sort of time frame would you be thinking about for making a decision? Pretty honest question. And people will tell you. They'll say, well, within a few weeks or a couple of months or by the end of the summer. Or, well, we're kind of looking right now. We're gathering information. He found that every customer he'd had in the last 3 or 4 years had bought within 90 days. Almost everyone had bought within 90 days of the first meeting. So that was his outside line. If a person says that they're thinking of making a decision within 2 or 3 months, good. He would work on them and spend time with them. If they said they were thinking of making a decision next year, they were just gathering information, remember, what companies will do is they'll have somebody who's not busy. And they'll say, well, why don't you call around and get some information on this product or service? See if it's available, how much people are asking for it, and so on. So they call you up and they say, I'm calling from big company, and I want to know how much what are your products or services? And you say, oh, well, could you come and give me a presentation? Oh, yes, yeah. And you get there and there's 3 or 4 of your competitors sitting in the waiting room. These people are just gathering information. And so therefore he would always ask, what sort of, good, even on the phone, by the way, what sort of time frame are you looking at for making a decision? If it was within 2 or 3 months, he would go to work on them. If it was beyond 2 or 3 months, he'd say, well, let me introduce you to one of the people in my office who has no future. And you can spend time with him. Now, I don't know how it works in Singapore, but let me tell you something that changed my life when I was working here in Southeast Asia. I used to finish a sales presentation, and the person would say, well, let me think it over, And I would say, okay, I'll call back. Or he would say, let me think it over, and you get back to me later. And I used to accept, okay, I'll get back to you later, you think it over. I want to think it over, by the way, are the words for goodbye forever. When a person says, I want to think it over, they don't think it over, they say goodbye forever. So I finally, one day, I got so tired of this, I said, I'm sorry, I don't make callbacks. What? I don't call back. Because I've told you everything that I can possibly tell you already. So now at this moment, you know everything you need to know to make a decision. There is no more information. So either it's a good idea for you, or it's not a good idea, but there's no point in thinking it over, because you know everything there is already. So why don't you just take it? And the person said, well, all right. And I went to the next office, and I said the same thing. Well, let me think it over. I don't make callbacks. Well, then I'll take it. And I went to the third office. I made 3 sales in 25 minutes. I was making, 1 or 2 sales a week. I made 3 sales in 25 minutes. I almost died. I had to run and go to the bathroom. I was so excited. And then I realized it was me that was causing the problem. As soon as the person says, well, let me think it over, I say, okay, you think it over. Yay, think it over, think it over. Then I spent half my life going back. And as soon as I walked out the door, they went into a 3-year meeting. You know what a 3-year... Yes, right, you've been calling them for 3 years. They're still in a meeting, right? I'm sorry, he's still in a meeting. You know. I know, I've been there. I said, I don't make callbacks. Now, as time passed, I became more successful. I'm selling much bigger projects, especially training programs and so on. People would say, well, can you do a proposal for us? And so I wrote a few proposals. Oh, these were beautiful proposals. I spent hours writing them and rewriting them. I'd send them in. It might as well have been throwing them off the edge of the earth, because they disappeared. I said, did you get my proposal? Well, it's here somewhere. We didn't have a chance to read it. How about a month later? Well, we lost it. Could you send it again? By Federal Express. So I'd send it again. A week or 2 weeks would go by. Did you get my proposal? Well, we're looking at a lot of proposals right now, and yours looks really good. And so we're going to compare it with others. Finally, the next time someone said, would you do a proposal for us? I said, I don't do proposals. You don't do proposals? No. If you want to do business together, we'll discuss it. I'll write you a letter of intent that outlines the agreement, but I don't do proposals. Well, all right then. If you don't do proposals, all the others do proposals. I said, I don't do proposals. I do follow-up letters of agreement. Well, I never heard such a thing. When are you planning to make a decision anyway? Well, we're just looking at it for the next few years. You know, we're really not in the market right now. And so, I have never done another proposal, and I never make callbacks. And you know something? My sales doubled and tripled and quadrupled. And all my friends are busy doing proposals. They're still waiting to hear back. Anyway, we create most of our problems. So with a high probability prospect, you can say, how soon would you be making a decision? Or if I show you exactly what you're looking for, or if I show you something that you really like at a price that really makes sense to you, when would you be thinking of making a decision? So you want people that need it, that want it, that can afford it, that can make a decision, that like you, that respect you, and so on. Now, what is the best part of selling? Psychologically, mentally, what's the best part of selling? I'll tell you what it is. It's making sales. If you're having trouble with that answer, you're in the wrong field. It's the feeling of winning that we have from making sales. It's when we feel happy. We make a sale and we feel happy. It releases endorphins in our brain. It makes us feel high. We feel cheerful. We feel wonderful about ourselves when we make sales. That's the key to our business. What's the downside of selling? What's the psychological negative of selling? It's dealing with difficult people. It's long, drawn-out meetings. It's not making sales. It's working hard and not succeeding. We love to succeed. We hate the feeling of not succeeding. So what is the problem in selling? It's working with people who are down here. Low probability prospects. By the way, when you work with low probability prospects, you know what happens? It wears you down. It tires you out. And you even start to think about quitting. And we did some research on you before tonight, and we find there are people in this very room who have thought about quitting. We know who you are. It's okay. Everybody thinks about quitting. You had a bad day, you think about quitting. You had a bad week, you think about quitting until you get something to drink. And you think, well, it's not so bad. Sometimes all you need to do is get a good night's sleep. Sometimes you need to go home for the weekend and just turn off your mind and get rested up again. By Monday, you're back to work again. Everybody thinks about quitting. It's okay to think about quitting. It's even okay to talk about quitting. How many times have you sat at home with your wife, your husband, and talked about quitting? You know, I'm thinking of quitting. You're thinking about quitting? Well, that's a good idea. Why don't you quit? I'm thinking about quitting. It's okay. You're not making any money anyway. Why don't you quit? You know. It's okay to talk about quitting. Just don't quit. All right? Talking about it is a way of getting it out of your system. You sort of, you vent. All right? But you just don't do it. You can talk about it and think about it. It's a psychological release. But what causes us to think about quitting is dealing with difficult people, low probability prospects. Now, who is a low probability prospect? A low probability prospect is a difficult person who doesn't really see any need for your product or service. They probably don't have any money anyway, and they probably don't have the authority to buy. Not only that, they criticize you, and they complain about your product, and they compare you unfavorably to your competitors. Well, your competitor's cheaper than you. Your competitor's better than you. Your competitor's nicer than you. We've been dealing with your competitors. We're very happy working with your competitors, and we've heard terrible things about you anyway. In other words, they're negative towards you. They're not in a position to make a decision. Has anybody dealt with these kind of people, by the way? I'm going to tell you something about yourself. You are a thoroughly good person. You are a thoroughly good person. You have a good heart. You are honest. You're decent. You're hardworking. You're polite. You're respectful. You're helpful. You want to help people with your product or service. Isn't that true? Say yes. Okay. Then you have the right to expect that other people treat you the same way. If you treat them nicely and respectfully and kindly, and you're trying to help them with your product or service, because what you are is a traveling helper. The whole purpose of your selling is to find people who you can help to improve their life or work with your product. And so therefore you're trying to do them as much of a favor as they would do to you. So you deserve to be treated well. You deserve that people treat you nicely. And if they don't treat you nicely, I hereby give you permission to get up and walk out. Okay? Because it is dealing with difficult prospects that wears us down. It grinds us down. I'll tell you a quick story. General George Patton was in charge of the Third Army in World War II. Now, you may be familiar with military history, but he was the most effective tank commander, combat general that the Americans had. He was very, very formidable, very good, very fast, very clever, and was able to capture something like 350,000 German troops in a series of brilliant maneuvers that have never been matched before. And in World War II in Europe, the soldiers were being fed in like meat into a grinder and were all being killed. As a matter of fact, most of them didn't think that they would live. However, after the D-Day invasion, soldier after soldier was applying to transfer into Patton's army. They were applying for transfers to get into Patton's army. Now, why is that? Well, the answer was that Patton had a philosophy, and that is, don't waste your men. Is take care of the men as much as possible. So when he started an attack, he would have orders in advance that if the attack had not been successful in 2 hours, to stop the attack. Because what he found was this, that after 2 hours, the casualty rates would start to go up at a rapid rate. That was his break point. So the attack would start at the end of 2 hours. If it wasn't successful, they cut it off. And what happened, because men would get tired, they'd make mistakes, start to shoot each other. It happens because it's hard work, I can tell you. Anyway, it meant that the casualty rates in Patton's Third Army were lower than any other army on the Western Front. If you got into Patton's army, your chance of living through the war was far greater. Now here's the metaphor or the analogy that I'm drawing. In selling, if you are dealing with difficult people and you cut it off quickly, you keep yourself up. But if you spend time dealing with difficult people, they wear you down. They tire you out. They depress you and they make you angry. You go home and your self-esteem is down. You feel like a loser. You feel like you're not very good at selling. So from now on, if you find that you're dealing with a difficult person, break it off quickly. Say, this is probably not the right product for you, but thank you very much for your time, and you have a wonderful life. Okay? Okay? And if you do that, what's going to happen naturally? If you stop spending time with difficult prospects, what will you end up spending more? Who will you end up spending more time with? Good prospects. And have you noticed, if you talk to a prospect, what is your name? Henry? Okay. I'm talking to Henry, and Henry's interested and he's asking questions. We're going back and forth. And Henry can't buy today for some reason, so a sale doesn't take place. But you still feel happy afterwards because you had a good conversation with a nice person. Isn't that true? So you feel good and you're out, you're ready to go to the next call, even though it wasn't successful, it wasn't the right thing for Henry. That's not the problem. The problem is dealing with difficult people. People who don't appreciate you and people who are not nice to you. So from now on, for the rest of your career, don't deal with difficult people. Because there's several reasons. Number one, they're not going to buy anyway. So you're wasting your time. Number two, if they do buy, they won't pay. Number three, if they do buy and they do pay, they complain all the time. They're always complaining, always calling you up and having you come over so they can complain to you. They're what are called customers from hell. And you all know what I'm talking about. And there are many companies today that have done this analysis that we're talking about, and they've decided to fire their customers. They've decided that there are some customers that are not worth it, and they call them up and they say, we would not like to have your business anymore. We would like you to go and buy from our competitor and ruin their life. Because the most important thing you have is the fact that you're up. You're optimistic, you're positive, you're happy, you're high energy, you're a nice person, you are well informed about your product, you have something valuable to sell at a good price, and your job is to get to the people who will appreciate it. Now, in a good market, everybody's buying. In a bad market, not so many people are buying. So you're going to have to call on more people in order to make the same number of sales. So you don't weep and cry. You say, well, this is just the way it is. If it's hot outside, you don't say, wah, it's so hot. Wah, wah. It's like weather. The economy is like the weather. You can't do anything about it. You just adjust to it, right? And you don't complain about it. You say, business is bad. No. You say, well, business is slower today than it was before. But when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And here's a wonderful thing. If you can succeed in today's economy, when the economy does turn around, and it always does, you will be so far ahead. You will be smarter, you will be quicker, you'll be more determined, you'll be more focused, you'll be more competent. So look upon it as a challenge to make you strong. Just like a runner will often run with weights or carry weights. Imagine that this is a weight that you're carrying, and when the economy turns around, you take off the weight and you will be wonderful at your field. So look upon it as a challenge. And people say, business is bad. Isn't that good? Say, that's good. That's good. Isn't that great? Because all the weaklings quit. Leaves more money for the professionals. Someone says, boy, business is hard. Sales are hard. You say, yeah, why don't you quit? Yeah. Get out of here. Okay. So prospecting means to ask, is this a good prospect? And when you call people, when you prospect for people, say, hello, this is Brian Tracy. I'm with ABC Company, and I think we can help you. And whenever you prospect, always talk about the result or the benefit of your product or service. You see, a good prospect is interested in the result or benefit of what you sell. A poor prospect always says, how much is it? How much is it? How much is it? Well, you don't even know what it is yet, but how much is it? Well, that's too much. Well, it's too much for what? Well, whatever it is, it's too much. You know what I'm talking about, Henry? Drives you crazy. You say, come here a little bit closer. Whack. Ow, 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 ow. You want to hit. But a good prospect, when you say, I think we can save you a good deal of money in your word processing costs, or I think that we can really speed up your time of delivery, or we can really improve what you're doing and give you better service at the same price. A good prospect wants to know how. How does it work, or what is it? A poor prospect says, how much is it? I can't afford it. Cost too much. Business is bad. Life's a bitch, and then you die. So it's really important. So prospecting is important. Now, I want to show you what I call the golden triangle of selling. Now, the golden triangle of selling is my own invention. And it's, I think, basically the key to modern selling. It has three parts. And let's put the customer or the prospect in the center. And it has three parts. And the first part, part one, is what I call relationship selling. Now, relationship selling is the key to success now and for the future. Is the very best salespeople are very good. We call them relationship experts. They're very, very good at forming high-quality relationships with people that they meet. We say that there's two parts. The first part of selling is prospecting. The second part is developing rapport or establishing a friendly relationship with the customer. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. My friend Lou Holtz says whenever you meet a new person in business or even personally, they only want to know the answer to one question. Do you care about me? Do you care about me? They don't care about your product. Forget your product. Do you care about me? How can you show a person that you care about them? How can you show a person that you care about them more than just wanting to make a sale? Right from the time you meet them. Well, okay, I'll give you several ideas. Obviously my coming here was an emergency. So they flew me in on a jet. When you meet a person for the first time, recognize that everybody's busy. So what I always do is I say, thank you very much for your time. I know how busy you are. As soon as you do that, you immediately separate yourself from the average person who just starts talking. I thank you very much for your time. I know how busy you are. People immediately stop because people don't recognize how busy they are. Nobody appreciates anybody else's time. Now, whenever you phone a person and you get through to the person, the very first thing you say is, hello, this is Brian Tracy, or this is Henry. Is this a good time to talk? I need about 2 minutes of your time to ask you a couple of quick questions. Is this a good time for you? As soon as you say that, the person stops because it's obvious you're a professional. You must be in the top 10% or moving there very quickly. Because this is how the top 10% talk. This is based on thousands of studies. The top 10% are very respectful of people's time. They don't say, hi, this is Brian Tracy, I want to call. No. What they do is say, hi, this is Brian Tracy. Is this a good time for you? Now, I do this with my best friends. When I call them and I get through to them in business, they take the call because it's me. And I say, hi, Mike, is this a good time for you? I need about 2 minutes. And sometimes I say, you know, Brian, somebody just came into my office. I got 2 other people here. The building's on fire. Most cases, something's going on. Remember, every single call that you make on a customer is an interruption. Every single call you make is an interruption. You are interrupting them from something that at that moment is more important than you are. So what you do is just slow down a bit and you say, is this a good time? And if you meet them face to face, you say, thank you very much for your time. I know how busy you are. They'll immediately relax and realize you're a professional. And they'll treat you very differently because you're treating them very differently. What you're saying is, I care about you. I care about you as a person and I know how busy you are. So relationship selling is based on establishing a high quality relationship. And I'll give you the other 2 parts of the triangle, and I want to come back to relationship selling because it really is the key to your future. The second part of the triangle, set number 2, is what we call consultative selling. And consultative selling is where you position yourself as a problem solver. You position yourself as a consultant. I'll explain this in a second. And the third part of selling is what we call educational selling, where you don't sell as much as you educate or teach. You teach the person, you learn the person's situation with questions, and then you teach them how your product or service can help them in a cost-effective way. You see, teaching is really the key to the future of selling. You're not trying to sell. You're not trying to talk people out of money. You're trying to teach them how they can improve their life or their work with what you do. The number one reason that people buy your product or service is they understand how much better off they can be. The number one reason why they don't is because they don't understand how much better off they can be because you didn't teach them. You may have assumed that they know, but you didn't teach them. Well, let me show you something that I think is one of the great breakthroughs in the psychology of selling, and it has to do with what is called positioning. Now, I know you're all familiar with positioning. Positioning is a trend in marketing started by Al Ries and Jack Trout, who wrote a book some 20 years ago called Positioning: The Battle for the Mind of the Customer. And positioning says that here's a customer, typical customer. Okay? And in the back of the customer's mind, there's a series of file boxes, very much like the boxes behind the check-in desk of one of the old hotels, okay, for mail messages and keys. Now, when the customer sees you, okay, here's you, or hears you, or thinks about you, the customer then opens a box for you. This is your box in the customer's mind. And by the way, you're exactly the same. The first impression is the most lasting impression. That's why we say you never get a second chance to make a good first impression. But whatever is in that customer's box determines how the customer reacts to you, thinks about you, feels about you, responds to you, takes your calls, buys from you, doesn't buy from you, and so on. So, in this box is you. The question is, what's in the customer's box with regard to you? Now, in positioning, what we do is we say that your job is to shape this positioning. We say that perceptions, the customer's perception of you, equals the customer's reality of you. I'll give you an example. I was in Shanghai earlier this week, and this fellow, nice guy, not very well dressed, square head, looked like his head had been put inside a box and then it grew. Square head, nice guy, not particularly handsome, not very well dressed, average guy. And he came in, and Richard and Patrick said, "You've got to meet this guy." And I said, "Great, wonderful." They said, "This guy was just written up in Forbes as one of the richest men in China. He developed a software program that had been bought by a major company, and they paid him $46 million cash. He's one of the richest young entrepreneurs in China, and he's come to this seminar." And they brought him in, and I said, "Wow, how are you? Would you like a business card? Would you like 2 business cards? Would you like several for your friends?" My perception of him, although he is very ordinary looking, my perception of him is, woo, because he's so successful in such a difficult market and written up in Forbes magazine, highly respected, probably richer than almost the whole rest of the audience put together. Can you see what I mean? My perception of him. Now, what if somebody said, "Just joking, he's the taxi driver"? Because he looked like it. He could have been a taxi driver. But because they had created a positioning of him in my mind, my picture in my mind of this guy, when they said, you're going to meet this guy when he comes in, he's one of the richest men in China, I'm thinking, wow. And he's very ordinary looking, but his perception was, wow. Anything he said, I was going to listen to. The point is this, is it doesn't matter the truth of the perception. A person's perception is reality. What is your name, sir? Pardon? Daniel. Daniel. Okay. Daniel, say, "I fly jet planes." Just say, "I fly jets. And I run marathons." Okay. So now, if Daniel said to me, "I fly jets and I run marathons," I'd say, okay. I'm not going to argue with him. He seems like an honest person. If he says it, then I believe it. Okay? So I accept what he says as the truth. So when you meet customers for the first time, what you say to your customer, they accept as the truth. If you say, "My name is Brian Tracy, and I believe very much in the importance of good relationships with my customers. Our philosophy is to give superb customer service to our customers." People say, "Okay." You say it's true, and I say it's true. And then we watch to make sure that what you say is consistent with what you said. So in interviewing tens of thousands of customers, we have asked them, how do you think and talk about the top salespeople? Now, we know who the top salespeople are when we ask them. And we know who the medium salespeople are, and so on. We find that salespeople have 3 positioning statements, or customers have 3 positioning statements about top salespeople. Number 1 is they see them as friends. They like them. They feel they're good people. They say, "This person cares about me more than they care about making a sale." Number 2, they say, "I view this person as a consultant more than as a salesperson. I see him or her more as an advisor, a counselor, a guide, and so on." And number 3, they see this person more as a teacher or a helper, a person who shows them how they can be better off. So your job is to create these 3 perceptions. The perception of being a high-quality relationship, an advisor and helper, a consultant, a problem solver, and a person who teaches rather than sells. If a customer sees you like that, they will buy from you. They will buy from you more readily. They will buy from you more regularly, and they will recommend you to their friends because they want their friends to buy from you as well. So your job is to influence this perception. And everything that you say counts. Here's the rule. Everything counts. Everything counts. Everything that you say counts. Everything that you do counts. Every interaction counts. We say that when you're talking to customers, you're talking about their money. And money is a very emotional issue. So they are hypersensitive to everything you say or do. If you say you'll be there at 10 o'clock and you come at 10 minutes after 10, they remember that. Is not on time for appointments, therefore can't be trusted. Is not dependable, therefore product is no good, therefore company is no good. Therefore prices are too high, therefore too dangerous to buy from this person. You say, well, how will you just come in late? I mean, how? Because you said you'd be there at 10. And you didn't come at 10, so you didn't do what you said you would do. And if a person has half a brain and they're nervous, then what they do is they say that you probably won't deliver the product on time, and you probably won't service it if you say you will, and nothing else you say is true either. People say, well, what does it matter? Customers, you were talking about money. Money is very emotional. As they say, money's not the most important thing in life, but it's way up there with oxygen. You know. So, everything counts, and everything that you do affects this positioning. You see, if you have a great positioning so that people think and talk about you in a positive way, then whenever you call them, say, oh, I'll take his call, or her call, and I got something I want to talk to you about. Good. And they'll see you more readily. They'll buy from you. Here's a good example. Is there anybody here who has a customer that buys from you without asking the price? I mean, after they've bought from you, they buy again, and they don't ask the price. You have customers like that? They just say, yes, I need some more? Say yes. Well, is it because they don't care about the price? Why is it that they would buy without asking the price a second time? It's because your position is such that the prices that you charge will be the right prices. They will be fair prices. They will be reasonable prices. They will be honest prices. Isn't that true? So they don't need to ask the price. It's like if you go to a restaurant, you don't need to ask, well, how much is every single, bit of fried rice? How much do I get? So in other words, once they trust you, and this brings us to the relationship selling model, and we say that there's 2 models of selling. There's the old model of selling, which is how I was brought up, and then there's the new model of selling. Now, the old model of selling had 4 parts. The 4 parts, the first part of the old model of selling was establishing rapport. We're talking about, but it was very quick. Hi, how are you? And immediately start talking about your product or service. There are still a lot of salespeople who sell like this. They don't take any time to get to know and understand the customer. The second 20% of the old model was qualifying. We'd find out if they had, how much money they had before we would spend any time with them. The third part of the old model, 30%, was presenting, and this is where you used every trick possible to talk them out of the money you determined that they had in stage number 2. And the last 40% of the old model of selling was closing, and all the emphasis was on closing the customer to get them to buy. In the 70s, the market began to shift. As people became smarter, better educated, as the market became more competitive, the market shifted and it went through a transition to the new model of selling. Now, the new model of selling has 4 parts as well. The first 40% of the new model of selling is building trust. Now, we call this the relationship selling model. And if you can build enough trust, everything else will take care of itself. If you can't, nothing else will work, not even low prices. You know and I know that building trust is the key to all relationships. The most important people in your life are the people you trust. The most important people in your work life, family life. The most important part of relationships is to be able to trust people. Absolutely. And so trust is what starts a relationship. So the way that you build trust in sales is you ask questions about people's needs. Now, the interesting thing is, the more you ask questions about what the person really needs, what they are doing now, how it's working, and listen to the answers, the more they trust you. And the more they trust you, the more they give you information about what they need. And the more they give you information and the more you listen, the more they trust you. And eventually the customer will reach a point where they feel so comfortable with you that they will tell you everything that you need to know to help them, or to tell them that this is not a good product for them. They know that you will never sell them something that they don't need. You're a professional. So when you ask questions about their needs, you position yourself as a consultant. When you listen closely to the answers, you tell them that you really care for them. So you simultaneously build the two parts of the golden triangle, relationship selling and consultative selling. The third part of the new model of selling, this is 30, identifying needs is 30%. The third part, 20%, is presenting. And presenting is where you show the prospect exactly how your product or service will satisfy the person's needs. You show them how, and what we have found by watching the thousands of videotapes is that top salespeople have the ability to match products and services much better than average salespeople. In other words, when they sell, they only talk about what the customer has said is important. They don't talk about everything. They don't talk about everything they like. They listen carefully to what the prospect has said, and then they say, well, based on what you've said, our product or service will do this. Have you ever had an experience where you've gone to a store and the person said, can I help you? And you said, yes, I'm looking for this. And they said, yes, okay, follow me. And they take you and they show you something that is not at all what you said. Have you had this experience? You want to whack them right in the back of the head. Because it means they don't care about me. They weren't listening. They're wasting my time. But then you've had the other experience. The other experience is where you go to the store and you tell the person what you're looking for, and they say, did you want this or this? Well, this. I think we've got something. Come with me. And they take you, and there it is, and it's exactly what you described. The sale has been made, hasn't it? I mean, you've literally decided to buy because they've matched so closely what you said. So here's a rule in psychology. It is that people don't argue with their own information. They will argue with your information, but they won't argue with their own information. So therefore, if you show them that this is what they said and your product or service is exactly what they said, the sale has almost been made. Because people have, it has been identified in psychology as what is called consistency. Human beings have an intense inner desire to remain consistent with what they said. Have you ever had your kids say, Daddy, you said? But you just said, but remember you said? Have you ever heard this? You don't remember saying it, but you feel compelled to do whatever it was because they told you that you said it. When a person says, this is what we need, this is what we want, this is our problems, and you say, well, our product will do this and it will do that and we'll solve that problem, people try to remain consistent with what they said. They don't argue with their own information. So therefore, really good salespeople make sure that their presentation fits like a hand in a glove into what the customer says they want. Oh, damn, this is good. All right. The last part, the last 10%, is confirming. Does this make sense to you? Do you like this? Is this what you're looking for? Until the customer says, yes, that makes sense. And then you can go on to close the sale. Now, let me give you the simplest of all closing techniques. It's called the invitational close, is where you simply say, well, if you like it, why don't you give it a try? Why don't you take it? Why don't you buy it? Or if you're selling services, say, well, if this makes sense to you, why don't you give us a try? The invitational close, why don't you give it a try, is a simple, powerful closing technique, one of the most powerful ever developed for a customer who's reached the end of the sales presentation. Do you like this so far? Yes. Well, why don't you take it? I was speaking to a salesman in New York last week. He said, that doubled my income. He said, it's my favorite closing technique. And he's a very successful guy. And double his income is a lot of money. He said, I'll double it again next year. He said, every single time I talk to a prospect, I present it, I ask any questions, I say, you have any questions? The person says, no. He says, why don't you take it? He said, it's amazing. They say, okay. So always, at the end of a sales conversation, invite the person to buy. Even if they say, well, I don't know, I'm not sure, let me think it over. You say, look, why don't you just take it? Okay. It's the most amazing darn thing. Look, you need it. You're going to get it sooner or later. This is a good price. We stand behind it. Why don't you just take it? Okay. It solves the problem. Remember, a product or service that a person needs solves the problem if you can sell it to them. Why don't you give it a try? Even if they're taking you by the neck and throwing you out into the street, say, why don't you take it? And often they say, oh, bring them back. We'll take it. So always, never leave a sales conversation. I used to come to the end of a sales talk, and I would be very enthused, and I've got the appointment, I've made the presentation, everything else, and then I say, well, what do you think? You ever done that? Well, what do you think? The person says, well, I think I'd like to think it over. Which means goodbye forever. We'll never meet again. Okay, so this is the new model, and the new model is the relationship selling model, and here's the rule. Listening builds trust. Listening builds trust. And trust is the key to sales success in the 21st century. Your job is to build one trust relationship after another. Because even if they don't buy from you today, if the trust relationship has been established and you keep in touch with them, remember, salespeople, top salespeople are optimists. They make more calls, they call back more often. It may be the person can't buy today, but they will buy next week, next month. Trust is the critical factor. I got a ride to the airport by this salesman in Atlanta, Georgia, and brand new Mercedes. And he was taking me to the airport, and he said, how do you like my car? I said, it's beautiful. And he said, you want to know how I got it? I said, sure. He said, well, I listened to your material year after year, especially that part about persistence, and continuing to call back. I called on this major Fortune 500 company, and we sell telecommunications services, wireless, telephone, fiber optics, satellite communications, and this is a major company. This company is spending $3 million a year on our services with our competitor. So I called on him and I made a presentation. And he said, we really liked it, looks good. He said, but you know, we've been with this other company for many years and we're quite happy with this other company. We really don't need your services. I mean, I really enjoy looking at this. I like to keep informed about what's going on in the industry, but we're going to stay with our existing supplier. He said, well, that's fine. He said, but I'd like to keep in touch with you and keep you informed on what's going on in this industry because there's so many changes taking place that you should know what's going on. He said, well, that's fine. I like to keep informed. He said, if you want to keep in touch with me, that's fine. He said, but we're not changing. We're happy with our existing supplier. So he, once a month, would call back on this major decision maker. And he would bring in new information. And they would have a cup of coffee, spend 15, 20 minutes. And he'd say, is there anything I can do to help you? He said, no, we're fine. Everything's going fine. About 6 months after this started, going every month, he said, Bill, he said, I really appreciate you dropping in each month and keeping me informed and everything else. He said, but we're really happy with the people we're dealing with. How long are you going to continue calling back on me? He said, until one of us dies. He said, you're really serious, aren't you? He said, yes, I am. He said, because this industry is changing so rapidly that there will come a time where we will have something that nobody else will have. We will be able to service you better than your existing supplier. He said, well, if you're willing to spend the time, you go ahead. He called on him every month for a whole year. At the end of the year, their existing supplier put in a rate increase and didn't tell anybody. And in the United States, if you put in a rate increase, all you have to do is publish it somewhere in some newspaper. Nobody has to see it. But then you can say, you published it, it was public. And the next year it was a 22% rate increase. He saw it on the bill. The first time he saw it, it came up on the bill. It made him so mad, he called him in. He said, come here, we're going to give you the whole account. He said his commission for the first sale, the first year, was $186,000. US. And he said he bought a brand new Mercedes with it. So, until one of us dies. All right. Listening builds trust. But the key is, once you've built the trust, keep the plate spinning. Just keep the relationship going. Remember, things are changing. Sometimes the biggest sale you'll make will take a year or 2 years before it comes together, and it'll be so big. I had one gentleman make one sale as a result of using some of these principles. He said he made one sale that was 68% of his entire year's quota in one sale, because it was solely based on building trust and maintaining that trust. So here are the 4 keys to listening. Number one, listen attentively. Listen closely. Listen without interrupting. This is what tells the person that you care about them. Listen attentively. Lean forward. Nod. Smile. Pay close attention. And don't interrupt. Just listening closely to people causes them to feel better about themselves and like you more, and they like themselves more. Number two is pause before replying. Just pause. Allow for silence. Don't feel that you have to jump in. Just say, nod, smile, That's an interesting point. And number three is question. We say question for clarification. And the very best question you'll ever learn in selling, and I've had many people say that this one question has been worth everything to them, is the question, how do you mean? How do you mean? We can't afford it. How do you mean? Business is bad. How do you mean? We're happy with our existing supplier. How do you mean? We're not in the market right now. How do you mean? I don't like you. I don't like your company. I don't like your industry. And quite frankly, I'm not interested in doing business with you. How do you mean exactly? Here's the point. How do you mean is a control question. But it's also an invisible control question. An invisible control question is one that you can ask over and over again, and the person will always answer it. And they will always expand on what they said. You say, we can't afford. How do you mean? Well, our business has been a bit slow lately. Well, how do you mean exactly? Well, we're down from the third quarter sales. Well, how do you mean? Well, we expected our sales to be this in the third quarter. In other words, every time you say, how do you mean, it opens up. But it's invisible because the question is never heard, only the answer. And as they give you the answer, very often you can see an opportunity to make the sale. You can see an opportunity to answer the objection and make the sale. So keep asking, how do you mean? How do you mean? And here's the rule, is the person who asks questions has control. The person who asks questions has control. The person answering the questions is controlled by the questioner. If you're in a sales conversation and they ask you a question, you're in danger of having them take control. Because as soon as you start answering, they're becoming the marionette and you're the puppet. Okay? So when a person asks you a question, what do? You say, that's a good question. Let me ask you something. And you ask your own question and take control. That's a good question, but let me ask you something. How do you mean exactly? Or what are you doing in this area? Or how is that working for you? Or when would you be thinking of making a decision if you found exactly what you were looking for? It doesn't matter what your question is, take control. The person who asks questions has control. By the way, I'm speaking primarily to the men here because the women all know this. Women are brilliant at controlling conversations with questions. Oh, they're so dangerous. I have two daughters, 22 and 10. And there's a stage in a woman's life where they're taken away by other women to a cave in the mountain. And they're taught how to control men for the rest of their lives. And ever after, they can control you with words and questions. For instance, you ask them something, they say nothing. They know that if they answer, you've taken control. So they won't respond. It's very unnerving for men. Now, they also, if you get into an argument with them, they fight back with. You saw a crouching tiger fight with a sword. They fight back with questions. And by the time you're finished, you were in the right when you started, and you're in the wrong now. Women know that they can control a little 100-pound woman can control a 200-pound man with questions. They can control him with questions so powerfully, they can control him with one-word questions. Oh? They can control him with nonverbal questions. He's across a crowded room talking to another woman, and she goes... It's like an icicle through the heart. So, the person who asks questions has what? Has control. So it's really important. And when you ask questions, you get a chance to listen. And listening builds trust. And trust is the key to effective selling. Are you with me so far? So therefore, the last part of questioning is feed it back. Feed it back in your own words. Just say, let me make sure I understand what you're saying. This is what consultants do. Instead of jumping in and responding, say, let me make sure I understand what you just said. This is what you're doing now. These are your plans for the next couple of years. These are your concerns, and this is what you're looking for. The very fact that you feed it back exactly the way they said it causes them to suddenly see you totally differently. They trust you completely. And if you feed it back accurately, they assume you have the proper solution. They are 80-90% sold by the very fact that you fed it back to them accurately what they said. It's like if you go into a store and you say, I'm looking for this. And you say, you're looking for this and this and this? You say, yeah, good, I think we have that. He'll go and buy it because they were able to feed it back so accurately. So relationship selling, consultative selling means to focus on the customer's needs. Keep asking the customer about what he or she is doing. How is it working? There's a direct relationship between questions and sales success. The more questions you ask, the more likely it is you'll make the sale. And the person who asks questions has control. And when you ask questions, you get a chance to listen. And listening builds trust. So these are the critical parts of psychological selling. Now here's the final point. Is the great uneasiness that we have in selling is because of the fear of failure and the fear of rejection. It's fear of rejection more than anything else that holds salespeople back. Fear of being told no, I'm not interested, I don't want it, and so on. However, when you position yourself as a relationship builder, when you position yourself as a consultant, when you position yourself as a teacher, and you focus on asking questions and listening closely to the answers, and then helping customers get what they want with what you sell, all the stress goes out of the sales conversation, both for you and for the customer. And selling becomes a joyous thing. You become happy about it. And if you then make a decision, I'm not going to spend any time with difficult people. I'm not going to spend any more time with them. I'm going to introduce them to each other and let them go off and ruin each other's lives. If you make a decision that from now on you're going to spend time with people that you like and you're going to treat them well and you're going to ask them good questions and listen carefully to the answers and try to help them get more products and services and buy your products and services, and if business is slow, you're just going to work a little bit harder and you're going to start a little bit earlier and work a little bit harder and stay a little bit later. And if you make that decision and you make the decision that you're going to be in the top 10% in your field and you work at it every day, and the only question you ask is what? How? If the only question you ask is how with regard to your future dreams and your goals and becoming the best in your field and achieving your sales goals, you keep yourself optimistic all the time, you keep yourself positive, you keep yourself happy, and at the end of the day you can say with all sincerity, I like myself. Say, I like myself. Thank you very much. God bless you.